Claire leaned into the microphone, lifted the old yellowed bank passbook and said, "Some things belong exactly where they came from." Then she dropped it. Straight into a silver ice bucket filled with melting ice and sparkling wine. I plunged my hand into the freezing water, sleeves soaked, fingers numb, dragging the ruined passbook out. Ink smeared. Pages curling. Claire was still smiling, triumphant. I turned and walked out without a word. Much later, I would learn what was hidden inside those damaged pages. Something that shifted everything I thought I knew about my marriage, my past, and my place in it. But that came later. 3 days later, the ruined passbook sat in my hand inside a clear plastic bag as I stepped into a downtown Providence bank. It looked fragile, harmless, like something nobody would ever believe mattered. "I need to check the balance," I said, sliding it across the counter. Marissa, the teller, glanced at the passbook, then at me. Her fingers froze over the keyboard. She typed the account number. Stopped. Typed it again. Her face went pale. Her eyes widened. She leaned closer to the screen, then looked back at me, suddenly cautious. "Sir," she whispered, "please stay right here." Minutes later, 2 men appeared, one younger, one older. The older one spoke first. "Mr. Hale," he said, guiding me away from the counter, "please come with us." They led me into a small private room. Alone, I stared at the wall. And my mind drifted back to a memory I'd never wanted to revisit. I was in the doorway of Martin Caldwell's home office. Claire was explaining something she and her parents had already decided. Her father sat behind his desk, calm, measured. Her mother stood near the window, arms crossed. Claire didn't look at me when she said, "This is how it has to be." I realized then, it wasn't about compromise. It was about control, compliance. And I was expected to fall in line quietly. The sound of the door opening pulled me back to the present. The older man placed a thick folder on the table. "Your grandfather didn't just open a savings account," he said. "In the mid-'80s he set up a protected trust." The folder revealed decades of untouched investments. Dividends reinvested. Early tech. Left untouched for decades. The number on the page made my stomach drop. $11,870,000. I thought of the ice bucket. Of Claire's voice. Of how easily she had dismissed nearly $12 million, dropping it into melting ice without even opening the cover. Not because she knew what it was, but because she never thought it mattered. "Is anyone else listed?" I asked. "No," he said. "It belongs only to you." I touched the warped cover of the passbook. It wasn't just money. It was leverage. And for the first time I understood something clearly. Every system has a weak point. I just didn't know yet where hers was. But I would. When I came home that night, the apartment was empty. Claire wasn't there. Her suitcase was gone, and the space in the closet where her coats used to hang looked deliberate, like she'd planned it, not like she'd stormed out. She texted me an hour later. She said she needed space and asked me not to call. There was no question mark. No explanation. Just another decision made without me. The next few days felt strangely controlled. I went to work, answered emails, cooked simple meals, and pretended everything was normal. But every quiet moment pulled me back to the same image. Claire standing at the microphone, smiling while she dropped that passbook into the ice. What stayed with me wasn't the humiliation. It was how easy it had been for her. She called me 4 days later. Her voice was steady, like she'd already rehearsed what she wanted to say. "I talked to my dad," she said. That didn't surprise me. She told me he thought the bank account situation was concerning and that I should have mentioned something like that before the reception. I reminded her that I hadn't known what it was either, and that she'd watched it get destroyed in front of everyone. She paused, then said, "That's not really the point." That's when I realized the conversation wasn't about honesty. It was about leverage. Claire came back that evening. Not to talk things through. Not to apologize. She walked through the apartment like she was assessing it. She glanced at paperwork on the table, asked where I kept important documents, and casually mentioned the passbook more than once. "So where is it now?" she asked. "In a safe place," I said. She nodded like she was mentally checking off a box. That night, lying beside her, I felt uneasy in a way I couldn't explain yet. Something in her presence felt strategic, not emotional. The call from her father came the next morning. Martin Caldwell spoke calmly, the way he always did when he wanted to sound reasonable. He said I was sitting on something valuable and that situations like this could become complicated if handled the wrong way. He offered help, not loudly, not aggressively, but with the quiet confidence of someone used to being obeyed. "You don't have experience with this kind of asset," he said. "Claire and I can make sure it's managed properly." Managed properly meant controlled. I told him I needed time. He didn't like that. After that, the pressure didn't stop. Emails arrived framed as advice. Text checked in on my stress level. Claire repeated phrases I'd heard her parents use for years, that this was for my own good, that I didn't want unnecessary problems, that families handled things like this internally. It started to feel coordinated. At the time I thought I understood why. I assumed Claire felt excluded and embarrassed. I assumed her parents were trying to protect their image. I believed the conflict was about money and control, nothing more. That assumption felt reasonable. It was also completely wrong. One evening, I overheard Claire on the phone. She was in the bedroom and the door wasn't fully closed. She said she just needed me to agree and that she didn't think I understood what I was dealing with. When the call ended, I stepped back into the living room before she could see me. In that moment, I believed she was choosing her parents over me. I didn't yet understand that she had already chosen something else entirely. 2 days later, the bank contacted me again. The same man I'd met before asked if I could come in. He said there had been inquiries related to the trust. When I arrived, he closed the door and lowered his voice. He told me that people claiming to represent family interests had been asking for documentation and clarification about the account. I asked him who exactly. He didn't give names, but he didn't need to. By then, I understood enough to feel uneasy. Someone wasn't just pressuring me anymore. Someone was preparing for something. That night, Claire finally said what she'd been circling around all week. She suggested we move the trust under joint management at least temporarily so everything would look clean and organized. She said her father knew the right people and that this didn't need to turn into a mess. I looked at her while she spoke. She wasn't angry. She wasn't worried. She was focused. I told her I needed time to think. She smiled and told me not to wait too long. Lying awake beside her that night, I understood one thing clearly. Whatever this situation really was, it wasn't about repairing our marriage. And whatever was coming next was already in motion. After that conversation, I started paying closer attention to what Claire said, and what she didn't. Before, I'd always assumed her confidence meant clarity. Now it felt more like rehearsal. She asked the same questions in different ways. Who else knew about the account? Whether I'd signed anything at the bank? If anyone had explained tax exposure to me in detail? None of it sounded emotional. It sounded procedural. A few days later, she told me she'd already spoken to a financial advisor. Not we. She had. She framed it like a favor, saying she just wanted to understand the basics so she could support me better. But when I asked for the advisor's name, she brushed it off and said it wasn't important. That stuck with me. Claire never did anything without a reason. That weekend, her parents invited us to dinner. It wasn't aggressive. It wasn't dramatic. It was polite. Too polite. Martin talked about the market. His wife asked about my work. Claire poured wine and smiled at the right moments. But every question drifted back to the same place. Had the bank explained timelines? Whether the account was fully liquid? If I'd considered putting protections in place? They never said the word trust. They didn't need to. At one point, Martin mentioned a lawyer he'd worked with for years. He specializes in family transitions, he said, like he was talking about retirement planning, not control. He offered to set up a meeting the following week. I said I'd think about it. The table went quiet for just a second too long. That night, Claire was unusually calm. She didn't push. She didn't argue. She just told me she hoped I wasn't making things harder than they needed to be. I didn't sleep much. The next morning, I did something I hadn't planned on doing. I called the bank. I asked if there had been any formal requests made in my name. There hadn't. But there had been inquiries about what would happen if the account holder were deemed unable to manage the asset independently. The phrasing mattered. That wasn't about help. That was about authority. That's when the story in my head started to crack. Up until then, I believed Claire's parents were driving everything and that she was just going along with it. But the timing didn't line up. The questions she asked came before the pressure from her father. The advisor she spoke to appeared before the dinner invitation. I started wondering who had actually started this. That evening, I went for a long walk and called someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Daniel. He'd been my grandfather's accountant for a short time near the end of his life. We weren't close, but he was careful, and more importantly, he didn't belong to Claire's world. When I mentioned the trust, he went quiet. Then he told me something I hadn't expected. My grandfather had been very specific about timing. He delayed final paperwork more than once, waiting for a clear sign about my marriage. He never said what that sign was. But he'd been watching. That information sat heavy with me. It suggested something I didn't want to believe yet. That this situation hadn't come out of nowhere. That someone had been anticipating it. 2 days later, Claire asked if I'd thought more about joint management. Her tone was patient, but there was an edge underneath it. She said waiting too long could raise questions. She said people might start thinking I was being difficult. I asked her who those people were. She didn't answer directly. She just said, "You don't want this turning into a problem." That night, while she was in the shower, her phone lit up on the nightstand. I didn't pick it up. I didn't need to. The message preview was enough. "We need this signed before Saturday." No name. No context. But I knew one thing. This wasn't about helping me manage anything. This was about speed. I sat there, staring at that message, and realized something important. Whatever they were planning, it depended on me staying passive. On me trusting the structure. On me doing what I'd always done. And for the first time, I decided I wouldn't. I didn't confront Claire. I didn't accuse anyone. Instead, I started preparing. Quietly. Because if there was one thing I was certain of now, it was this. I wasn't the only one playing a game, and I was already behind. Once I stopped reacting, everything around me sped up. Claire noticed it first. She started checking in more often, asking how I was feeling, whether I was overwhelmed, whether all of this was too much for me. Her concern sounded sincere, but it always circled back to the same point. We needed a solution. And fast. I let her believe it was getting to me. I told her the numbers made my head spin. I said the bank had mentioned tax exposure and compliance issues I didn't fully understand. I admitted I was worried about making a mistake that couldn't be undone. None of that was a lie. I just didn't tell her what I was doing with that worry. 2 days later, she suggested a timeline. Her father had an event coming up. A charity fundraiser in Hartford. Nothing huge, she said. Just the right people in the room. Lawyers, donors, advisors. It would be a good place to finalize things, she told me. Clean. Professional. Witnessed. That word again. Witnessed. I asked what exactly needed to be finalized. She said paperwork. She said signatures. She said it would protect everyone involved. When I hesitated, she reached across the table and took my hand. I don't want this to turn into something ugly, she said. I just want us to move forward. It was the first time she'd used us in days. So I nodded. After that, the tone shifted. Emails arrived with attachments. Documents labeled as summaries, drafts, preliminary outlines. Nothing that demanded immediate action, but everything nudged toward inevitability. Martin followed up with a call. He spoke like someone closing a deal he already believed was secured. He told me the fundraiser would be perfect. Neutral ground. No pressure. Just a chance to sign what needed signing and put the whole thing behind us. I told him I appreciated the help. I let my voice sound uncertain. That night, I called Daniel again. I didn't tell him everything. I didn't need to. I asked him a simple question. What happens if someone signs responsibility they don't realize they're accepting? Daniel didn't answer right away. Then he told me responsibility has weight, and weight doesn't care whether someone understands it or not. That was enough. Over the next few days, I read every document Claire sent me. Not once. Not twice. I read them until I could hear the language in my head without looking at the page. I noticed what was emphasized: authority, representation, historical oversight. I noticed what was buried: liability, continuity, accountability. And I noticed something else. Every draft assumed one thing: that the person signing believed they were gaining control. Claire asked if I'd reviewed everything. I told her I trusted her. That answer relaxed her more than anything else I could have said. The night before the fundraiser, she laid out my suit and reminded me what time we needed to leave. She sounded lighter. Almost relieved. As if the hard part was over. As if all that remained was formality. The fundraiser was held at a private venue just outside the city. When we arrived, I recognized faces from photos I'd seen online. Board members. Donors. People who liked to believe their presence meant stability. Claire stayed close to me. Her father moved through the room like he belonged there. At one point, she leaned in and whispered, "This will all be over soon." She meant the uncertainty. She didn't realize she was right for a different reason. Martin pulled me aside halfway through the evening. He held a slim folder under his arm and spoke quietly, confidently. He told me everything was ready. That this would protect me from scrutiny. That it would make things easier for Claire. All I had to do was sign. I looked at the folder. I looked at him. And I felt something settle inside me. Not anger. Clarity. I nodded. I told him I was ready. And in that moment, he made the mistake I'd been waiting for. He smiled. Martin led me into a smaller room off the main hall. It wasn't dramatic. No closed doors. That was the point. Normal places make abnormal decisions feel safe. He laid the folder down and opened it with practiced ease. "I've marked the pages," he said. "Nothing unusual. Just confirming continuity." Continuity. Another soft word. I sat down. The paper in front of me looked exactly like every draft I'd already seen. Same headings, same tone, same reassuring language. Authority. Stewardship. Representation. I flipped through slowly. Not because I needed to read it, but because I needed him to believe I was. Martin watched me with the kind of patience that comes from certainty. He believed I was nervous, I was out of my depth. This moment was about fear. I asked one question. "What happens after this?" He smiled again. Smaller this time. "After this," he said, "everything stabilizes." He slid the pen toward me. It was heavier than it looked. I signed. What? Then again. Initials where the tabs indicated. As soon as the pen left the page, something shifted. Not in the room. In him. He gathered the papers a little too quickly. Stood before I did. "Good," he said. "That takes care of it." When we walked back into the main hall, Claire was waiting. She searched my face. I gave her exactly what she expected to see. Relief. She exhaled, took my arm and leaned in close. "I knew you'd do the right thing," she whispered. Her father nodded at me from across the room. Approval. We stayed another 20 minutes. Long enough for the moment to settle. Long enough for everyone to believe the story they just told themselves. Then we left. In the car, Claire talked about the future. About simplifying things. About reducing stress. About how this would help us move on. I listened. I even agreed. That night, after she fell asleep, I opened my laptop. I didn't rush. I logged into accounts I hadn't touched in weeks. I accessed systems I was still legally authorized to access, at least for now. I sent 3 emails. Each one short, precise, impossible to unsend. By morning, the process had started. Not the one they expected. 2 days later, Martin called. His tone was different. Careful. Measured. He asked if I had time to talk. I told him I did. He said there had been a development. He said some responsibilities were triggering review clauses earlier than anticipated. He said it was probably nothing, but it would require clarification. I let him talk. When he finished, I said one sentence. Which section are you referring to? There was a pause. Then he said a number. The wrong one. I thanked him and told him I'd get back to him. When the call ended, I sat there for a long time. Because for the first time since all of this started, I knew something for certain. They had signed a story. I had signed a mechanism. Claire was the first one who sensed that something wasn't right. She didn't say it out loud at first. She just started acting differently. Checking her phone more often. Getting irritated over small things. Staring at the screen longer than usual after reading emails. At first she blamed work. Then she blamed her father's staff. Bureaucracy, delays, people being careless. That's what she told herself. I didn't correct her. About a week after that dinner, Martin asked me to come by his office. Not the big one where he usually met clients. A smaller office tucked away down the hall. No windows. Just a desk, 2 chairs, and fluorescent lighting that made everything feel flat and uncomfortable. The moment I walked in, I knew this wasn't a courtesy meeting. He didn't offer me coffee. He didn't ask how I was doing. He sat down, opened a folder, and started talking immediately, like he wanted to control the pace before I had a chance to say anything. There seems to be a misunderstanding, he said. A procedural overlap we didn't anticipate. I nodded and waited. He pushed a document across the desk. It wasn't a contract, more like a summary. Highlighted sections, handwritten notes in the margins, references to clauses most people never read twice. I didn't reach for it. You initiated an internal review, he continued. That triggered legacy clauses that were never meant to be activated this early. I looked at him and said calmly, they weren't inactive. They were conditional. For the first time he paused. Just for a moment, but it was enough. That process wasn't designed to be initiated independently, he said more carefully now. It requires alignment. Alignment with whom? I asked. He didn't answer. And that silence told me everything. Then he changed direction. Claire is concerned, he said. She feels blindsided by what's happening. Blindsided by what? I asked. Again, no answer. That night, Claire didn't wait until dinner. She confronted me as soon as I walked into the kitchen. Her arms were crossed, her voice controlled, but I could hear the tension underneath. Why didn't you tell me? She asked. I looked at her and said, tell you what? She started listing things. Emails from legal departments. Requests for documents she didn't recognize. Auditors asking questions that hadn't come up in years. You said everything was finished, she said. You said this was over. It is, I replied. Just not in the way you assumed. Her expression changed immediately. Not anger. Fear. You're doing something, she said slowly. Something you didn't talk to us about. Yes, I said. I am. She stared at me like she was trying to recognize the person standing in front of her. You promised, she said quietly. I shook my head. No. I did exactly what I was asked to do. That's when she lost control. She accused me of manipulating the situation. Of embarrassing her father. Of creating problems on purpose. I didn't interrupt her. I let her finish. When she finally stopped, I said, I signed what was put in front of me. So did you? She didn't respond. The next day Martin called again. This time he dropped the polite tone. He spoke quickly, sharply. He used words like containment, reversal, damage control. He asked if I was willing to cooperate and resolve this internally. I listened without interrupting. When he was done, I said, you taught me something. What? He asked. That authority doesn't come from confidence, I said. It comes from structure. There was a long pause on the line. A few hours later, an email came through. Formal. Urgent. An invitation to an emergency meeting. All stakeholders present. Claire forwarded it to me with a single line. We need to fix this. I closed my laptop and sat there for a while. Because by then, I understood something very clearly. They weren't trying to understand what I had done. They were trying to stop it. The meeting happened 3 days later. Not at Martin's office. Not at their house. A glass-walled conference room downtown, neutral, chosen so no one could claim control. Her father was already there when Claire and I walked in. He didn't stand. Martin sat beside him, folders stacked neatly. 2 unfamiliar faces sat across from us. Legal. observing. This needs to be resolved today, her father said immediately. Resolved how? I asked. You crossed boundaries, he replied. You destabilized what you were trusted to protect. You didn't bring me in as family, I said calmly. You brought me in as a solution. The room went still. Martin tried to soften it. There are interpretations. I'm speaking to him, her father cut in. You don't decide when processes begin or end. I didn't, I said. The structure did. Martin opened a folder. We're proposing a reversal. Quiet. No exposure. And in return? I asked. We make this disappear. That's not an offer, I said. That's pressure. His eyes hardened. This can get uncomfortable for you. I know, I replied. I checked. Martin stiffened. The clauses you're trying to suppress trigger independent oversight once activated, I continued. You can't roll them back without a record. Her father stared at me. You planned this. I prepared. You still think you're powerful? He snapped. You're married to my daughter. I looked at Claire. Well, silent. That's pressure, I said. And pressure doesn't work on systems. When the meeting ended, no one shook hands. Outside, Claire stopped. What did you do? She asked. What I had to, I said. In the days that followed, Claire stopped reaching out. When we finally met, it was in her father's office. She sat across from him. Listen. Agreed. Her voice carried his cadence, his phrases, his authority. I realized she wasn't standing with him. She had become him. But later, when she finally saw him clearly, the fear, the control, the secrets, something shifted. Admiration cracked into disbelief. She left the room whispering, I never knew. And I understood the final truth. She found her truth too late. I found mine in time. Every life reaches its X. This was mine.